This video is about uncertainty. Uncertainty as a feature of the world we live in and as a feature of our knowledge. Why are we so unsure about the world, about our identity, about what to do? What I will explore in this video is the very concept of uncertainty as a feature of reality. It will not be a physics discussion, but rather a reflection on what this deep uncertainty, this persistent fundamental uncertainty, as I called it, means for our understanding of the world, for our plans, for our identity, and for our actions in the world, our creativity in the world. Look at this quote attributed to Yeats and somewhere else to Bertrand Russell. It says that the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Why do the best lack all conviction? Why aren't the best so sure? And why are the worst so confident? And here we can see this quality of overconfidence connected to ignorance, while the quality of uncertainty is closely connected to knowledge. And this has been explored in many other places. Socrates, I know nothing, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and so on. So uncertainty is a built-in component of our knowledge, our understanding of the world. But, and this is something I will explore here, is it runs much deeper than that. It runs into the very fabric of reality. At a certain point in the Enlightenment, people were very happy with their new science tools. And there seemed to be a high degree of confidence in what science can give us, what science can tell us. There are two very interesting quotes that express this. Lord Kelvin says, "The beauty and clearness of the dynamical theory, which asserts that the whole universe is governed by mechanical laws, is at present obscured by two clouds." Right? So our understanding of the world is on the verge of being complete. Dynamical theory is the mechanical theory, the classical way of understanding the world. And he says that, well, there are only these two little clouds. One of the clouds led to the development of relativity, and the other led to the birth of quantum mechanics, which changed all our view of the universe. So these little clouds weren't insignificant, and the two clouds changed the whole landscape. Second example is something that came to be known later as Laplace's demon. And Laplace imagined this great intellect that was capable of knowing the velocity and the momentum of all particles in the universe at a certain point in time. Okay? So a complete intellect, an intellect that knows everything. And he says, if this intellect were vast enough to acquire this data and to submit this data to analysis about the positions and the speeds of all the particles in the universe. And you could think that if somebody could know the location and the movement of all the particles in the universe, it should be relatively easy to predict the future, right? So this intellect that Laplace talks about, it would embrace in a single formula the movements of the great bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. So these are two very interesting examples of overconfident trust in science that come from the 19th century developments, from the Enlightenment. And again, we have seen that this demon, something that the Laplace intellect was later called a demon. This demon doesn't really exist. It can never exist. Even if you could know all the locations and all the velocities of all the particles in the universe, you couldn't know that. But you still couldn't predict the future. And there's one more example, which I'll mention in the next episode when I talk about incompleteness. But this hubris of the Enlightenment, this very unjustified trust in the capabilities of science, of the science of the time, and its ability to explain the world in its infinite detail, looks to us now like adolescent ambition, right? You assume you can do all these great things in the world. And when you gain in perspective, when you see the bigger picture, this previous overtrust seems overconfident and immature in a sense. So in this video, I will next discuss this concept of uncertainty, not in technical details, not in physics, but just as a concept, and the related ideas around it, and what it means for our knowledge, our understanding of the world, for our planning, our ability to predict the future, our identity, and also for our creativity, for our actions in the world and what we do. In Fuzzy on the Dark Side, I talk about the persistent ambiguity and uncertainty in the world. And I examine that from two different directions. One is the inevitable incompleteness of intelligence. We can never know enough, we can never know exact things. But the other side is the rich, complex, layered world. The world itself has this fundamental quality that is opposed to our intelligence of it, in a sense. The world itself has uncertainty built into its fabric, as I said in the previous section. And this has some very basic and fundamental presence in reality. The first hint at that was the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So remember the two clouds and the Laplace demon that looked at the world by knowing the location and the velocity of all the world's particles. Well, surprise, you can never know the location and the velocity of the world's particles. Not even that. You can never know the location and the velocity of a single particle. So this is what the Heisenberg uncertainty principle says, that there will always be a degree of uncertainty in one of these two qualities. Actually, the increase in the certainty, the increase in our knowledge about a particle's position leads to a decrease in our knowledge about its momentum, about its speed, and vice versa. So there is a constant here, the equivalent to the Planck constant, this h. But we will never know enough. The more we know about one thing, the less we know about the other. And this reflects something related to the whole discussion about, is the electron a wave or a particle? And this applies to many other basic particles, fundamental subparticles. And this has led to the second principle here, which is how Bohr tried to explain this fundamental uncertainty by invoking what became known as the complementarity principle. So basically, sometimes we need mutually exclusive descriptions of a phenomenon to describe it. So it is both a wave and a particle. It cannot be both a wave and a particle to our mind, but in reality it is. And this points to a certain discrepancy between reality as it is and our mind. This can also be linked to other concepts. Well, the idea here that Bohr is indirectly saying is that these ideas of wave and particle are actually functions of our own descriptions of them. And so if I was going to talk about what all this means for knowledge, well, one, knowledge is contextual. Knowledge is limited. It is destined to be bounded. Predictability is bounded. Predictability of the future. Truth itself is pluralistic and complementary. Truth itself. And this is why Niels Bohr says truth and clarity are complementary. And sometimes people misinterpret that and think, yeah, well, more clarity and then you get closer to truth. He's actually saying the opposite. Right? The more clear you are, the further you are from truth. And this is fundamental because truth itself is plural. It has many different versions, many different faces. No single conceptual frame, no single idea can capture all the multiple perspectives that exist in reality, right? And Bohr says the opposite of a correct statement is a false statement, but the opposite of a profound truth might very well be another profound truth, okay? So this is getting very interesting. The idea of inherent fundamental uncertainty in the world actually reflects ideas about our knowledge and about reality itself as having all these different faces. We have to remember that we use a certain language of concepts to map the world. We have all these ideas in our mind, but our concepts, our ideas, our language can never fully describe the world. This has to do with incompleteness, something we'll talk about later. But a relevant quote from Bohr also helps illuminate this. He says, "It is wrong to think that the task of physics is to find out how nature is. Physics concerns itself with what we can say about nature." Okay? So we have this soup of concepts, of ideas, and these are a function of our knowledge trajectory. So we talk about a wave, we talk about a particle. In reality itself doesn't care about what we call a wave or a particle. Interestingly, some other fundamental things could be explained like that. Mass and time, as discussed in the theory of general relativity. Well, what we might think is mass might be another aspect of something else, which is also energy, and time and space could also be one thing. These are different faces of something. All these concepts that we live with, we understand the world through, we are suddenly surprised that they are not real things in reality. They are just conceptual. So we started with the basic idea that reality itself is incomprehensible by using these concepts because of the inherent uncertainty that they will lead to. This idea of complementarity that Bohr talks about. You need two mutually exclusive perspectives to describe something. This is deeply unsettling because mutually exclusive to our minds, to our logic, means one of them doesn't intersect the other. They can't exist together. But in reality, they can. And this directly points to how different our mental map of reality is than actual reality, right? So we can differentiate between what we can say and even more deeply, what we can see from what there is. Heisenberg says what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. This leads us to a deeper sense of humility when it comes to our knowledge, when it comes to the assessment of our knowledge. Remember the hubris from the previous section. It also has implications about two important things. One, the role of the observer as participant in the creation of reality through this observation. And two, plurality, this plurality of truth, the different faces of truth, and what it means for creativeness and the emergence of the unexpected. And these are things I'll talk about in the coming two sections. There are interesting implications of this uncertainty principle beyond simply the position and the momentum of a particle. Because essentially the uncertainty principle brings the observer into the observation of reality. When we say that you can only know this much about this dimension before it becomes impossible to know more about this other dimension, it means that the act of measurement is changing reality. The observer is an active participant in reality by observing it. And this has been, interestingly, it has been experimentally demonstrated. So the collapse of the wave function. Is the electron a wave or a particle? Well, it depends. Are you looking at it? It seems crazy, but this is what it is. It can behave as a wave, and then you look at it and it behaves like a particle. This is, in other terms, this is the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment. A little bit evil, but very insightful about reality. So when you do look, reality arranges itself in a certain way. And here, I was just recording something for the podcast last week about the researcher being the instrument. The researcher being the instrument in social science, that's pretty much accepted and reasonable. But even in other sciences, the researcher is the instrument, because the ideas, the concepts that we bring with us and our intervention with reality change it. So we are kind of framing the world, not just as we describe it, but as we see it. When we look at the world, we frame it. Of course, when we describe it, we frame it. But even when we look. Personally, when I started learning about QM in college, about quantum mechanics, it felt very unsettling. It felt wrong. And I couldn't live with the fact that, well, reality itself is inherently unpredictable and uncertain according to these concepts. But then after a while, you learn to accept it and live with it and see it as part of a richer vision of reality. Now, interestingly, Einstein said something about QM. He said, if it is correct, it signifies the end of physics as a science. I don't know. I'm not sure how true that is. Schrodinger said that he hated it because it is deeply unsettling. It seems to run against our basic understanding of science. But this is the message here. It is telling us that your assumptions about predictability of the world are incorrect because your knowledge maps will always be incomplete. There are a number of interesting stories here that try to relate this idea of learning to live with uncertainty. Now, interestingly, Heisenberg, when he came up with the uncertainty principle, it came to him as sort of a revelation. He had this strong fever. He was in isolation for quite some time. And then he saw it. And this frequently happens. We talked about it a number of times before. But look at what he said when he figured out the idea, or when the idea materialized in his head. I had the feeling that a strange world was revealing itself. I felt almost giddy with excitement. And this is what we feel. There is this strange world, this different notion, different vision of the world that is making itself seen. But interestingly, this vision of the world points to a lot of richness and even the impossibility of comprehension on some level. Heisenberg himself went into mysticism, became too philosophical, and Bohr did the same. And you could see why. If you are researching something in physics and you discover that reality is inherently uncertain, you can never know enough, and you discover that by looking at reality you change it, you will start thinking deeper about things. Heisenberg also said that the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. So something like this with Ramanujan. But this is always the story with science, because initially you get so much trust, so much confidence, but this confidence is because of your ignorance, in a sense. And when you see all the vastness, when you see all the possibilities, to speak the language of QM, you sort of say, oh, there must be another dimension to all of this. Interestingly, Bohr had a horseshoe in his house, and some people told him, why do you have this here? You are not superstitious. He said, yeah, of course, I don't believe in it, but I've been told that it works even if you don't believe in it. Bohr was also known to go into these obscure rants during his lectures. He would talk about things that were not very intelligible to his students. And one time he was interrupted, like one student was interrupting him saying, Professor Bohr, I don't understand your question. I don't understand what you're saying. And to this, Bohr answered, well, neither do I. And he says something to that extent, saying that, well, don't express yourself in terms that are more clear than your thinking. And so we need to deeply learn to live with this uncertainty. And this has implications for our understanding of the world, as we said in the previous section, but also for our own perceptions of predictability, right? How much can we predict about the future? And the richness of reality and our role in it, our role as people who shape reality by observing it and by describing it. There is a very interesting incident here that happened between Bohr and Einstein. Because, one of the other implications of QM is that reality is inherently probabilistic. So we cannot know exactly about something, right? There is uncertainty, but we have probabilities. So there is a probability that the electron will be here, for example. And as I mentioned to Einstein, this was a very annoying concept, right? Reality can't be inherently probabilistic. What does this even mean? And so Einstein had the famous quote saying, God does not play dice with the universe. Can't be inherently probabilistic. But to me, Bohr's answer is more interesting. He told him I think this was in the Solvay conference, he told him, Einstein, stop telling God what to do. You don't want to accept reality as being probabilistic, but stop telling God what to do. It is probabilistic. We don't want it to be probabilistic is like us telling God what to do in other terms, right? And this has implications for our understanding of how we work too. Because if everything is probabilistic, this is how our approach to work, to planning, should be, by embracing this probabilistic nature. Predictability itself is very limited. It's limited by structure, chaos, and the indeterminacy. And one of the things we can do in response to that is plurality. And I'll talk about that in the next section. So the uncertainty principle, the inherent uncertainty of reality, some of the ideas introduced by quantum mechanics. One of them, obviously, the probabilistic nature of reality that we talked about, leads to a number of implications. Our understanding, our work in the world, how the world around us is shaped, and how this moved from the purely scientific realm, the purely attempt to understand the world, into our work and action in the world. First, obviously, this probabilistic nature, probabilistic understanding leads to a plurality of sorts. And we talked about this when we said, well, truth itself is plural, has all these different faces. There are these different views being integrated, and things collapse into one simple state when we observe them. But even then, our observation has strict limits. Niels Bohr says there is no quantum world. There is only an abstract quantum physical description, right? The world itself is not like that. The world itself, according to our vision of it, according to our ability to describe it, is probabilistic. So our best response here would be to embrace this plurality, this multitude in the world. And this is something I've been preaching in a number of places. I'll talk about that in the end of this section and the next one. So uncertainty itself is in the world, in our understanding of reality, but it sort of became like a spirit of the times. It is being integrated into many of our activities. The effects of uncertainty, the effects of exploring uncertainty can be seen throughout many different fields. I'll talk about some of them. One, in science itself, obviously, in the development of physics, but also it started spilling over into other fields, into the birth of new sciences and into impacting new sciences. It kind of flowed into very abstract sciences like mathematics, very applied sciences like computer science. We'll see that in one of coming videos. But this plurality, this uncertainty and probabilistic nature and these implications are also present in the philosophy of science. In our understanding of knowledge itself, this has been demonstrated in a number of interpretations of the development of our sciences, including Kuhn's ideas about the structure of scientific revolutions. It is also present in the arts, and this is why I said it's like a spirit of the times. So there are many movements in the arts that kind of reflect this uncertainty, explicitly and implicitly. Cubism, think about Cubism, for example. You have these different perspectives being integrated into one picture. Now, I posted a video about Picasso. I got many replies that this is not a real artist. This is horrible. Modern art is so basic and primitive and unartistic. But I will venture beyond and talk about the works of Pollock, for example, and Duchamp, which also reflect some of these ideas about uncertainty, about the participating observer, and I'll explore those further. But it's also present in literature, sometimes in the works of Kafka, in the works of James Joyce. There's this persistent uncertainty too, this idea of incompleteness, perspectives. In film also, starting from Rashomon, but also other more modern films like Inception, Donnie Darko, parallel realities. Now, the Marvel films kind of ruined that idea with overdoing it with all these parallel universes. It became annoying in a sense. But also, this view has presented itself into the fields of business management, innovation, and entrepreneurship as well. And there is this embrace of uncertainty in design, in innovation. Steve Jobs says you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. Because looking forward, you cannot predict the future. There are no dots. Okay? Looking backwards, you can look back at your experience and say, okay, this happened and then this. But looking forward, it's impossible. So you have to embrace uncertainty in that sense. In tech, it's frequently said, move fast and break things. I don't endorse that. Sometimes it's said, if everything is under your control, then you're not moving fast enough. So we relinquish control because certainty is an illusion anyway, because uncertainty is so powerful and so deeply integrated into the nature of reality. So what does all this mean for creativeness? And I call it creativeness, as I mentioned in one of the previous videos. I call it creativeness versus creativity to point at this, because creativity is a skill, creativeness is a state, and we can see it in retrospect. We don't have full control over it and so on. Well, what does this mean? First, that truly creative works emerge through this embrace of ambiguity and openness. We cannot fully predict them. We have to utilize plurality for things to emerge out of this plurality, for the unexpected to emerge out of this plurality. And I will link that to the Atlas of Worldly Wisdom in the final section. So what does all this mean? What does this discussion of uncertainty, the probabilistic nature of reality, the participatory observer, the role of the observer, and the plurality of truth, what do they all mean for us? And what should we do about it? So first, this discussion of uncertainty presents new ideas, new visions of truth, of predictability, and of creativity. First, on the level of knowledge, it kind of nudges us to be more humble by accepting the plurality of truth, the incompleteness of our mental models, the inevitability of approximate thinking from our side. We have to embrace many more ideas, and we have to be more careful with what we try to express. Bohr says, never express yourself more clearly than you are able to think. On a second level, talks about courage and planning, this probabilistic nature, tells us essentially that predictability is very limited. And here it's interesting to remember this quote by Schrodinger. He says, "I do not like it, and I am sorry I ever had anything to do with it." This unsettling nature of unpredictability, we have to learn to live with it. This is the essence of risk, courage. Finally, more is more. This is about plurality. Walt Whitman says, "I am large, I contain multitudes." I would like to link this concept within a sub-series in the Prometheus shot about some of these relevant concepts that will probably include incompleteness, chaos, in addition to uncertainty, of course, emergence, and some other concepts that I will try to connect. But to say more about what we can do about this, the Atlas of Worldly Wisdom is an attempt to put some of these ideas into practical use. So it is about embracing a plurality in knowledge, in actions, and in plans. About embracing uncertainty by looking at the roles of probability and luck, acknowledging approximate thinking and incompleteness. Essentially, we respond to these qualities of the world by trying more, by having courage, by visualizing, by accumulating. We can then observe the emergence as it happens and attribute less of it to our own genius. I was trying to think about if it was possible to summarize this discussion on uncertainty in one sentence, and I was unable to do that for a number of reasons after I did the research. Eventually, on some practical, communicated level, some of these topics defy simplicity, and their understanding, their knowledge has a very individualistic nature in a sense, right? So in a sense, there is an emergence of some truth out of this research, but it is not one thing that I can say in one sentence. This takes us to the complementarity principle and the plurality of truth, right? Cannot be expressed in this one concept or one sentence. It defies simplicity on some level, even if indeed there was some simple truth behind it all somewhere, as Heisenberg would say.